Good morning, everyone. I'm Lisa Ansell, Director of Academic Programming at the USC Casden Institute. And on behalf of the USC Casden Institute and Hebrew Union College, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to today's event on the topic of a new story, Iddo Gefen's novel, Mrs. Lilienblum's Cloud Factory. Today, we are delighted to welcome Iddo Gefen, acclaimed author and PhD student in cognitive neuroscience at Columbia University. Iddo Gefen will be in conversation with Dr. Hagit Arielichai, USC Professor of Hebrew Language and Visiting Scholar at the USC Casden Institute. Iddo Gefen, currently based in New York City, explores the intricate relationship between narrative understanding, human memory, and decision-making in his academic research. His debut short story collection, Jerusalem Beach, won the 2023 Sami Rohr Prize for Jewish Literature, and one of his stories is now being adapted into a film by Ryan Gosling's production company. The subject of today's discussion is Iddo's second novel, Mrs. Lilienblum's Cloud Factory, published in April of 2025, which is a comic novel about a tech startup that turns sand into rain clouds. The story opens with Mrs. Lilienblum discovering drinking a martini in a crater in the Israeli desert. Eli, her adult son, tries to understand what happened to his wacky mother while grappling with the legend of a missing hiker named McMurphy and his feelings for Tamara, a visitor to the family's hostel perched on the edge of a crater. The narrative races forward as the Lilienblum family builds a company around Mrs. Lilienblum's invention, weaving comedy from startup culture, the obsession with company valuation and funding, the secrets families keep, and the dynamics of romantic and family love, all told with humor, warmth, and compassion. Iddo will be in conversation with Dr. Hagit Arielichai, who teaches Hebrew language and is serving as our visiting scholar at the USC Casden Institute. Hagit specializes in language acquisition and proficiency, with particular emphasis on communicative competence. Dr. Hagit Arielichai holds a PhD in foreign languages and literatures, focusing on Hebrew studies from the University of Strasbourg, and currently serves as Hebrew language coordinator for Hebrew Union College's Lockheim School for Judaic Studies at USC. In her language courses, she thoughtfully integrates Israeli history and culture to deepen students' linguistic and cultural understanding. Hagit's research centers on language acquisition methodologies, the linguistic phenomenon of Hebrew roots, and the development of cultural competency. Together, Iddo Gefen and Dr. Hagit Arielichai form a dynamic pairing for today's conversation, an intersection of storytelling, cognitive science, and language education. We are privileged to be in their company and eager to listen as their voices and visions intertwine. Iddo and Hagit will be in conversation for about an hour, and then you will all have the opportunity to engage in a dynamic question and answer session with our speakers by placing your questions in the chat function at any time during this event. And now it is my great pleasure to invite Dr. Hagit Arielichai to begin today's conversation. Welcome, Hagit.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for the warm welcome and kind words. It's my pleasure to be here today and introduce to you an amazing young author, Iddo Gefen, which we actually met a couple of years ago during time of COVID and when the world seemed like it's shut down. And yet you presented to me with this wonderful book, Jerusalem Beach. And I was stunned because I said, what, Jerusalem? What, what is this? What the beach has to do with Jerusalem? And then came another book, Mrs. Lilienblum, Cloud Factory. So I'm so excited to welcome you into this session today. And I know a lot of our audience is very eager to also hear your thoughts and your process of really writing such amazing two books that are already making some good headlines.
Thank you so much.
Yes, Iddo, so when I got the book, the Cloud Factory, Mrs. Lilienblum, I right away thought about, the title, because both of your titles are really provoking, some interesting thoughts. So I wanted to start with really asking you, how did you really come up with the title for Mrs. Lilienblum Cloud Factory? There's so many components woven into this title.
Yeah. Sure. No, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm so happy to be in LA in spirit. Like the first time I was visiting in your class, and since then I'm just coming a lot. I even went to a Lakers game a few months ago, and I was like, okay, this city is just getting better and better every time. And so yeah, I'm really happy to be here. Yeah, and in terms of the title, it's actually the thing I find the hardest to find a title for a book. And I can say this title and this experience of this book was very weird for me. Usually, like with my short stories collection, when I get and write a story or a name, it usually starts from a question. What if something would happen? So, for example, the story that is now produced by Charlie Kaufman and Ryan Gosling is a story about somebody that makes like dreams and nightmares as a day job, and they uses it to play around with people and see what happens. And that's just a question. But with this book, I had this like vision of sort of this cloud in the middle of a crater in the Israeli desert, and suddenly I saw this like woman sitting in the middle of the Israeli desert with a martini glass, completely happy. And I was like, oh my God, I'm not sure where it came from, but I have to check it out. And I am originally in Israel from like Tel Aviv and Ra'anana, which is the center of Israel. And the desert is more in the south. So I went there. And actually, if you even can put in the slides now, that would be perfect.
Yeah. So before we go into the slide, Iddo, just a second.
Yeah.
I don't want to give the audience yet the vision. I want to, Iddo is from Tel Aviv, which is the center. Yes, it's kind of saying New York is the center. Yes, so I really, when Lilienblum name came up, I was saying, oh my God, why did he chose Lilienblum? And I right away connected to the scholar Lilienblum. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with him, but I want to give a little bit of a background to this, because then you can connect it maybe better, and they'll see the slide and say, oh, okay. So Lilienblum was a Russian scholar and an author, and he was born in Kovno, which was Lithuania, in the 1843. And he read many of the Maskilim, particularly of Avraham Mapu and Achad Ha'am, Asher Tzvi Ginsburg, and which produced him with some feelings that dissatisfaction of what's happening in his one world of Talmudic studies, and he became very abhorrent, and he felt that there's an ignorance and a superstition surrounding him. And he decided that I need to combat this. And what happened in 1880 forward with the anti-Jewish riots kind of arose Lilienblum to the consciousness of how unsafe the Jews are in exile. And he gave utterance to his apprehension in his article, which was published in 1881, where he points to the reestablishment of the Jewish home in Palestine, which is the only solution for the Jewish question. And of course, this article did not remain without any voice, and held really the practical. And in 1883, a committee was organized at Odessa for the reestablishment of a Jewish home in Palestine, and Lilienblum was served as a secretary with Dr. Pinsker, the author of the Auto Emancipation, which he was the president and was very famous, of course, in Katowice, where all representatives from all European Jewry gathered to discuss the plan for the Jewish homeland. So yes, Lilienblum is a major figure here, and the name struck right away something very profound in this tapestry of the Jewish homeland. And his activity of course cover periods of history, and so forth. And in Israel, in Tel Aviv, the street Lilienblum holds a significant and central theme of all the news publication and books publications were all lined up there. So here I'm inviting you to kind of comment on how the name Lilienblum, Mrs. Lilienblum, kind of connected.
Yeah. So I feel what I'm supposed to do now as an author is say of course, I took all this history into account. I knew everything you told just now. The honest answer is I wasn't aware I didn't think of it while I was working on it. And I think that's a lot of the artistic process, and sometimes that you do something that you have just in your, you think about it because you know it from the culture or from the names, but it pops out and becomes something much different or much more deeper than you expected. And then as the author, you said, yeah, of course, I thought about it all along. It's always there's something really surprising about the creative process.
That's the brain process.
Yeah, totally. And we'll talk about that also. But I can say for me, Lilienblum honestly was the street, and my favorite bakery in Tel Aviv is there. And it's a place I associated with, a place I really like. So it came from there. But really, as you mentioned, Lilienblum is, at least in Israel, is associated a name with Tel Aviv and the center of Israel. But when I went to the desert, it's very different in many ways. And I went there to explore and do research for my book. And I went to a village that is called Mitzpe Ramon, which is near a crater that is actually in the Israeli desert.
Now's a good time to put the slide and show
that would be perfect.
How it looks like. A magnificent area. I think one of the beautiful areas in Israel, and I think in the world.
So you can see here in the picture the crater now, and I had some events with the books that somebody said, how did you invent this idea of a crater in the center of Israel? I'm like, that specifically was not my invention. That's completely there, and it's beautiful. And if you'll go to the next slide, you can see the village, which is called Mitzpe Ramon. This is in the snow. Although it's in the desert, it's also one of the highest points in Israel. So sometimes they have snow there. And when I went there, I knew I just had this intuition. I want to write a book about the area. And I went to the local pub, and the first thing that somebody told me there when I started talking about me writing a book, this woman came out to me and said, oh, of course, you're going to write a book about the landing in Mars that we did here. And I was like, what is going on? And she started to explain to me that just a few months before, some local people from the village, together with scientists from a nearby university, decided to try to simulate how it would look like to have a landing in Mars inside the crater. So they had a group of people, they went into the crater, but of course, because it's Israel, things are not as organized as in the US. So they got there and there was no food. So they invited a pizza. And the pizza guy, they said the delivery guy was so confused what's going on. He's getting to the middle of the desert, seeing these people as astronauts. And I think it's not actually that something that is in the book, but it captures a lot of the atmosphere I wanted to create, which this is very creative, interesting thing that happens a lot of the time in Israeli society, but also there is this gap between one's dreams and things they hope to achieve and what actually happens. And in that sense, going back to the title, I think that like Mrs. Lilienblum's Cloud Factory is playing on that, in the sense that it's this like wild imagination of something that you're not sure if it's even real or not, but it's such a big part of Israeli innovation and the way I think Israeli perceive the world, and I want to explore that.
So that's really that brings this idea of really talking about some central themes in your writing, because you bring the center, like, Tel Aviv and its and the periphery. And I think for many people, as much as Israel is small, people don't understand what does it mean, the periphery in Israel, because what is periphery? It's so tiny. And I want to kind of explore that with you, because the story is kind of a global breakthrough of emerging from the Israeli geographical and social margin, and the social margin there, referring Israel, is quite a very different world. So can you take us a little bit more in depth into this kind of process, how you kind of emerge these two,
No, definitely. So I think in Israeli society, it's such a big topic that is what really less known outside of Israel. But I also think it's a very universal theme, in which you can also see in the US with the big cities, LA and New York, compared to people that feel that they're not part of the center. And in Israel, there's a big like this ethos of the startup nation. And like, we are the startup nation. Everybody is part of this amazing tech economy. But there's a lot of work showing that actually most of the people come from the center of Israel. And there are people who feel that they have a lot of access to these technologies, to these opportunities, to this world. And a lot of people who feel left out. And I think also I see it now. I'm now doing my PhD in Columbia University, and I've been living in New York in the past 3 years, and I see a very similar theme, I think, also here, in the question of who feels part of the center and who does not. And that's something I really wanted to explore, because I have to say, like, I am, as somebody who, I see a lot of the times people who have more opportunity of being part of this, like, tech industry, and people who are not, and there is a gap there, and this gap is not only like economical, it's also very cultural, and it affects a lot of politics, the way society is created. And I think the more we'll maybe even touch about that, about AI, for example, and the new technologies we're seeing now that are emerging. And I think a big question is, how do we create a society in which we feel people have access to it? And I can say in Israel, because the tech industry is such a big part. And so, for example, I'll give you an example. I have like 10 friends that we grew up together. Each of us learned different things as undergrads. And now 8 out of the 10 are working in the tech industry. I'm in neuroscience, and I have another friend who's a teacher, and that's it. So, like, in a sense, there's a feeling that the future is in tech, and a lot of people that may not be most passionate about it find themselves part of it. And I think the younger generation all over the world, also in the US, are dealing with this feeling of wanting to be part. And it's something I really wanted to write about. And I think I learned much more while writing about the book.
Yes, and I think that the fact that you planted this idea in the desert where we want to flourish, and the whole idea of making the desert bloom, and it's not an ancient, idea, and it hasn't started just, back with Lilienblum. It's happening right now. And as much as Israel is very small, everything tends to center in Tel Aviv, and it's exploding there. And there's the movement and idea for this new generation to really spread their wings and just go a little bit outside of Tel Aviv, and it's possible. And with your book, actually, you open up that idea that it can be anywhere, and I can be anywhere, and actually has a lot of meaning. Whatever I am doing in my journey. So I thought also that to plant the Lilienblum in the desert was kind of interesting, kind of with continuing this dream. We haven't, suffice it. It's on and going.
Yeah. No, totally. And I also have to give context because we are in a specific time and place. Like this book was actually published in Hebrew before October 7. And of course, the world has changed very much rapidly in many ways. And I think for me, this book, I'll be very honest, in the days after October 7, I was also a bit like, it was hard for me to talk about these issues in terms of there's so much things going on that are not related, and this book is not about that. But as time passed, I think like for me, it shows a part of the place I came from. And I think that it has a deep questions about how do we want to see that society in the long run, and how do we want to create it in a way that will be better after everything that's happened, and finding also the place of innovation in times of crisis. And I'll give you just an example. The book, as you mentioned, the main invention of the book is like the woman Sarai Lilienblum, which, by the way, Sarai is the name of Sarah in the Bible before it's changed to Sarah. And for me, I chose that name. I'll have to be very honest. An Israeli growing up in Israel, I feel that a lot of the times actually Jewish learning is better in the US and people know better. So I only, when I was like 25, I always thought like Sarai was this like amazing Spanish name. Well, I really wanted to use in my books. And then I noticed like the whole story behind it. And for me, it was very interesting to try and have a figure that Sarai is the main character, which is this woman that is both a mother and a teacher, but also really wants to do her own thing and invent this crazy stuff. She's like a robotics teacher, but she can't really do it. And for her, she's having this invention of like creating a cloud machine that creates cloud out of the sand, and it's not really clear, is this real or not, or is this a fantasy?
I actually wanted to ask you the question, like, what inspired this idea of machine that turns sand into cloud? How did
Yeah. So I think in Jewish tradition, actually, there's a lot. The desert is such a big place in Jewish tradition, in the sense that it's a place of change and metamorphosis, and a place where people go and change themselves both as a person and both as a nation. And so I felt there was something for me very exciting about exploring that place. And honestly, like in Israel, there's so much talk about like tech, and everybody has their own startup invent. Really, you'll go to the supermarket and you'll talk to like somebody working there, and like, I have this amazing app I'm working on. Like it's everywhere around. And I thought it would be interesting to try to create an invention that in its core is very low technology based, and it's very almost like, again, this more of almost a metaphor about creating out of sand clouds and eventually rain and water. And I honestly, when I wrote it, I thought like, okay, this is so nuts. Like, and it says this could never happen in real world. And after the book was published, somebody told me like, there's a tech company in Israel that creates like water out of air, and they have this like crazy machine that does that. I'm like, okay, so maybe maybe one day somebody could even do it out of sand. But I think for me that it's a real idea of there. You also have like Moses finding water like from the rock, and I think it's a lot. There's something about like, at least how I grew up in like Jewish tradition of finding water in place you won't expect it. And water is a lot of the times this metaphor for creativity and life. And again, if going back to what we're seeing now post October 7, I think that's a main thing I do love about Israeli society, is this people insistence of looking for life in places you wouldn't expect, and choosing life and choosing to find a place that are good. And I think it's such a big part of our culture. And I think that's the parts that could also help us, in a sense, have a better future despite everything that's happening.
Absolutely. I think also like when we look at this, the area and the crater, the sand there is unique. It's, it's fine. It's a multicolor. So multicolors. And I think that's part of like when we look at something, creativity is also to show an area that how it's so open and vast and open for us to just find this wonder. And I think, as you're saying, the theme of our thinking is also finding the wonder, starting with the
Yeah.
blueprint.
Yeah,
And the
totally.
guideline. Yes. So that kind of tag along in your book, which I found very amazing. When we go into the desert, we're dealing also with, the climate. Yes. So I kind of want to bring that because you kind of
Yeah.
put together in your novel the issue of the climate, the technology, and
Yeah.
family. And so these are themes that you kind of woven together and they intersect. And maybe some more reflection of, I don't know, Israeli society or maybe the global society. So I want to kind of
Yeah.
get your.
So I had a interesting like change of the way I perceive my own book, and that always happens. An author, you publish a book, you think you write about one thing, you end up understanding you wrote about a different thing. And coming into this project, I thought I would want to write a book about really these ideas of like startup nation and like also the parts that is less glammy and fun than people think of. And there's a lot of like really comic things in this world. I have so many friends that changed companies just because they had a better restaurant next to the offices. And like you would think people would go like because they want to change the world. And it's a combination of both. And I think in that way it's something I wanted to show. But in a sense, with time, I understood it's more actually a book, I think, in the end, and its core about family. Because the main relationship is the book is between the mother, Sarai, that is, in a sense, a mother that chooses to rebel, and her child, Eli, which actually it's an interesting thing about the translation, because we really dealt with it, because you can read it as Eli, and a lot of people read it as Ellie, and I'm like completely cool with that. But it's like really yeah. But it's really her child is actually always trying to put the family back together and like not let her rebel too much in the sense that the family should stay stable. And I want to, in a sense, change the dynamics. It's usually the parents who does that, and I want you to see what happens if a child does that. And I think like there is in a book you see like when they try like to talk about this invention Sarai did, and people in the tech industry are always like, oh, this would be helpful for climate, and they have this like amazing ideas and ways of changing the world. And I feel so many tech companies talking this like big slogans and missions. But honestly, like if you'll read the book, you see Sarai is just a super curious person that does whatever is fun and interesting for her. And I think it's also a dynamic I see very much with my friend in the tech industry is that you have your own passions and you have the things you want to do, but also you need to do something that is effective on the world and also will make a change. And I think sometimes there's a conflict there. And I have to say it's even as a writer, like a lot of the times there's things I want to write about, but I also really want to have a deep connection with my readers. Like I think Virginia Woolf said once that like the most amazing thing for her is just the writing itself, and everything that comes later, which is the publication and talking with the readers, isn't important. And I love Virginia Woolf. I was inspired by her, but I do not agree with her in that point, because for me at least, writing is a way of connecting to another human being. And like I work a lot in neuroscience, and I see all the kinds of technologies that we use, AI and virtual reality and stuff like that. And I still think that the best technology we have today still cannot get us into another person's head as well as a book can do. And I think a lot about the value of literature and the point and place we're in now. And I think that's an amazing thing that books and literature, and also in a sense, like also film and TV, but I think there's something very intimate with a book that is important for explore. Yeah.
we don't want to lose the human touch, and that's nothing can replace that with all the advancement. And I think Virginia Woolf's time was different time. So
Yeah, no. So and also going back to things like climate and stuff, like I think a lot of the times there are things that sound good and are abstract as ideas. But I think for me, while I learn, and I'll be honest, it's also after October 7, learning that it's so important to think about the person on the other side. And when I say I want to have a tech company that will affect climate, who am I thinking about? And when I'm writing a book, who am I thinking about? And I think what you see in the book is that in many ways, Sarai is this character that she thinks about the people in front of her, and it's hard for her to think these like abstract ideas. And in the book, it's a problem because if you want to be a CEO of a tech company, you need to think abstract. But I think actually one of the problems we're having now is that people think only about things in a very abstract terms, even when it comes to Israel and Palestine. And actually, it's much more important to see also the humane thing behind that. And that's also something that I think books do very good. We take a specific story and dive into it. And it's very different, for example, from scientific work in which we try to say something about the world in general. But I think that's also the power of literature.
So I want to take you a little bit back into Sarai. You mentioned she's definitely a unique character. So I just wonder how you imagine her. Is it based on somebody you knew, or somebody that there was an idea that planted her in your mind? Tell me a little bit about the process of Sarai.
Yeah, no, definitely. So it's funny, like in Israel, because it's like a small place, and so whenever you write, you think about how would your family and your uncles and aunts will think about who you're writing. And like there's a famous Israeli author, Eshkol Nevo, and he put it amazingly, like whenever you write, you have your aunt Batya in your head, which Aunt Batya is the aunt that will read the book and say, how do you write like this about your grandmother? What are you doing? Stuff like that. So when I started writing fiction, I was like, okay, I'll write something that is completely different from my life, does not have connections. And there's always this weird process when the book is finally on the shelf for the first time. It's the second time it happens to me. I open it up and I'm like, oh my God, my whole family history is here. I did not intend. But yeah, in many ways, I feel that Sarai is based on my own mother, which she is not an inventor in many ways, but she is a woman that always did the things that are good for her as a mother. And that's like really, for me, amazing. But as a kid, I was always like, it was weird for me. Sometimes she would choose, I don't know, like, to do stuff that like are nice for her, and I'm like, so she wouldn't like, for example, I don't know, sometimes she wouldn't like cook like a meal for me when I come back to school, but she would like give me, I don't know, something like something she bought. And as a kid, like it was hard for me to understand that, but now I have so much admiration for her choice to do things in life in a way that's good for her. And she was always very loving, and she was always there for me whenever I wanted, but she was always very insistent about, it's also important for me to do the things that are important for me. And if I don't want to need to be in a box that I'm supposed to be as a mother, so it's okay, we'll find a way that it's good for me and it's also good for you as a child. Like for me, it was such an important lesson, and that I follow till this day also as a writer. And so I really learned a lot from her. And yeah.
So, I mean, in the subconscious, even if you didn't think that you wanted, your family to be in the book, but obviously in subconsciously it happened. So that kind of leads us into the process of writing. And because all your research now is all about the connecting between writing and the brain. So maybe take us a little bit into why you wanted to research that. Tell us a little bit of your background in the writing and how you combine the two, and what currently you're doing in your research.
Yeah, totally. So me as an undergrad, I thought I would be very curious, honestly, about like literature and philosophy and the things that as a writer you're supposed, in a sense, to learn. And when I got into my first year as an undergrad, I realized I was much more interested and engaged in this world of like neuroscience and psychology. And I think in the sense, it's the same motivation that drives me as a writer, and that is to understand something about human behavior. And I think the more I got that, like, that's my smart author answer. There's another answer, which I'm still a kid of
Investigating.
Jewish parents that wanted me to have a real job. So that it's a combination of them both. But in a sense, I think, like, for me, I always understood that I have questions about the world. For example, what does it? I have in Jerusalem Beach a story about, like, old couple looking for the beach in Jerusalem. That, as you mentioned, there's no beach in Jerusalem. But they're doing it in a sense because the woman in the story has Alzheimer's, and she has this, like, very clear sort of a memory, although it more seems like an illusion of her in a beach in Jerusalem, and her husband is going with her, hoping it will help her. And I was just, like, really at that time, in a sense, obsessed with the question of how does it look like when a partner you had for so many years fades out. It's also things I saw in my family with my grandmother and grandfather, and, like, how do you keep this emotional connection? So in a sense, I go from there and I ask that in a story, but I can't ask that in a lab. Like, it's not a question that you can do as a neuroscience. Oh, this is love and this is them. Like, it's hard, but there are questions that you can ask in the lab and you can ask as a writer. For example, what areas in the brain are involved in understanding stories? Like, I could write about it, a lot of interesting stuff, but it wouldn't be accurate without the research. So for me, it's always a combination, and I honestly also see a lot of the more I'm into it, I see so much things that are the same. Even in a sense, a scientific theory, it has to be based on facts, of course, and it has to be based on science. But there's also, in the sense, a story of how you tell that science, and it's such a big part of that work. And you know what? Maybe if you can put now the slide with the video, that would be a good way of explaining what I'm actually doing. So if you can put back the slides, yeah, great. And now I'll show you a short video. There's no audio for the audience, so you don't need to hear anything. And I'll ask you a very simple question. What did you see? You can think in your heads. If you want to write in the chat, you can write. And then I'll explain to you how this connects back to my research. And it's a very old video, so it's a very low tech graphic, just to keep in mind, so we can show it now, and let's see what you think.
So any thought, anything that comes to your mind, feel free to just share in the chat.
Okay, great. So if there's answers in the chat, great. If no, I'll just move on and say.
I don't see anything. Okay. Go ahead and share with us, and I can.
Okay, sure. So this is actually a video made in the 40s, and the researchers that did this video, and they hope that people will see it and say they just what they see. And a lot of the people talked about, it seems there's sort of a relationships between the different between the triangle and the square, and one of the triangles seems really, really mad, and it seems like there's sort of a one is trying to help another, and there's sort of a conflict and a story there. And actually, the researchers were very surprised by these answers because they thought people would just write what is on the screen, which is abstract circles and triangles on our screen moving in space. But that is, of course, not what we saw. We saw a story, and we saw relationships. When we saw that, our brain was involved in so many ways. So your memory area was involved in a time when you saw somebody bullying somebody else, and it triggered that. And your emotional centers were thinking about like all kinds of what are we seeing and how is this, what do they feel there? And I think that's such an amazing example of how we see stories, even in the most basic frames that in a sense are not there. But I think our brain is honestly sort of this amazing story machine that looks and finds stories all the time. And I was very curious to understand why. Like, why do people, in the end of the day, after a very hard day at work, go and see a TV series on Netflix? Like, you're so tired. Why are you looking at these characters who are not real person? And the more I study it, I think stories have such a big value in our lives in so many ways, because the world as we live it is so chaotic. And I think we all know it in a sense since October 7th. Things do not make sense a lot of the times. And I think the amazing thing that stories can do is explain what works and what leads to another. And the understanding that one thing leads to another can also help us predict the future, can also help us behave better, and can also help us understand other people. So it's such an interesting thing that I think actually one of the things we're so good at as humans is understanding story. And I can give you an example for a research I'm doing now, for example.
Yeah, I
There's
just want to share, before you go into sharing about the research, I just want to share a couple of the answers that just came in.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
Interesting, because it's very interesting to see how our brain works and how we interpret things. So
Yeah.
one of the answers was trying to fit in. And obviously it's and the conflict and bullying, the struggle, for dominance and territory. So I think it's you can see that there's how our brain works and how we interpret the things can be various in a different ways. So I wanted to share with you some of the answers from the.
No, so that is perfect. And there's an amazing finding in the neuroscience world. But what happens in neuroscience, we take people to a MRI machine and we scan them. And what happened like 20 years ago is that while people are waiting to do something, a task, researchers found out the brain is working without them supposing to do anything. And at first, people thought, like the researchers, this is just a bug. But actually, they found out there's a whole network in the brain that works when we are just trying to think about our day, about things that are happening. And that's what we see on the MRI scanner. And that is actually the areas that work into play when we see a story. So when you saw that video, you're trying to combine all the things you know about the world, about relationships, about dynamics, and put it into there. And more than that, I can tell you that if you'll have
currently happening, isn't it? Like currently in your mind are very bothering you, or things that are very much in the frontal, of your brain, then you kind of right away illuminate that.
Totally. So there's so much work showing in memory. There's a kind of memory called episodic memory. So that would be the memory. There's two kinds in general memory. One is semantic. So that's if I ask you the capital of the US and you say Washington, D.C. So that's just something you know about the world. Episodic is a memory that you remember a place and time. So the first time you rode a bike or something that happened. And a lot of the times when we have a hard week or something happened to us, our episodic memory affects the way we understand and interpret the things. So, and I can say it really affects me as a writer, because when I was a younger writer, I felt in many ways a story has this like ideal structure, and I have to get into it. And if I have a really bad day, that does not need to affect my story. And the more I know, both as about writing and also I think about the world, now I'm trying to actually, if I had a bad day, I'm trying to put it into the book.
That's a good time to write.
Yeah. And we unfortunately we had some bad days
I
in the
know.
past years. But in a sense, I think a lot of the power of literature is taking this emotional energy and trying to dive into it. And actually, I feel some of the best things I wrote came from that, not by trying to be loyal to the structure of the story, but being loyal to my emotional truth.
Yeah. So, wow. So, because I had a question before that, when you were talking really in the book about rain and weather, and they're both very literal and symbolic, yes? Yet it's little, but it's very symbolic. And so, what does the rain represent to you in the story? And like when you
Yeah.
process it in your brain beyond, the drops, that, the cloud produces, yes?
Yeah. So I think for me, rain is also in a way, and we always have this towards like tomorrow is Rosh Hashanah, and like it's also we're starting to see the rain, at least in Israel, also here, and it's like I think our opportunity to be for change and to wash away some of the things and hopefully have a better year, and I think what Sarai is doing in the story is so trying to create in a way in the middle of the desert with no real chance rain despite it all, because she wants a new change and shift in her own life. And I think some of the people around her in the story are also, beyond just not understanding what's going on with this weird startup invention, are insisting on creating the structures that they live in. And there's actually, in the book, there's a scene in which Sarai finds herself in this like tech conference in Tel Aviv, which is also, I want to play around with this difference because she comes from the South. She's not used to this like fancy conferences and hotels. And she's being asked there to talk about like her vision and stuff, and she goes to a very personal place that at first is not completely, the audience doesn't get, but she talks about her and the idea, a Jewish idea of the breaking of the vessel, and it's actually an idea coming from the Jewish Kabbalah, which says that the world before it was created, there was infinite light inside vessels, and the vessels couldn't not contain all that light, so they broke. And a lot of those ideas of, for example, Tikkun Olam that we know so well is trying to bring down and create the world, take the shadows and create a new world in that. And I think one of the things that Sarai mentions in the story, and also her vision about the world, is sometimes you don't need to try to replicate what happened already, but create something new with these shadows and create a new world and a new framework about thinking of the things. And again, in days like this, where I feel the world is so crazy in so many ways, sometimes it's not only about trying to go back to what was before things were, but also trying to create something new and maybe better even.
Like the rain will wash out everything. It just will start all new. Yeah.
Yeah. There's actually a very famous Israeli song by Meir Banai about talking about like how rain will clean it up and like offer a new opportunity. And like in many ways, again, this is a book that was written before October 7, but in many ways, I hope that there would be this change and finding a way of reinventing in ourselves as people and as a nation and communities in a way that will be valuable.
Absolutely. It's a beautiful how this novel blurs the reality and the fantasy. It's a relationship in the book. And it seems like it was very important for you to keep, the reader, it's kind of uncertain about what is real and what is not real. Yeah. So you kind of, going and tiptoeing between reality and fantasy. And I wonder why you chose that style. What kind of, if it was
Yeah.
something that you thought about, or you just kind of very naturally just happened?
Yeah.
You can talk about.
So that's an interesting thing. Like as an author, there's stuff you really like to do and there's stuff you do not like to do. I really like to invent the beginning of a story or a book, and that's the parts when I do all these like fantastical things. Everything that comes later in terms of editing it and actually writing it sentence by sentence. Like if I could be just like the one who writes the beginning and then somebody else will take over, I would love to do that. But yeah, I think in a sense it is something that is very intuitive for me. And I thought a lot about where it came from. So at first, I thought I was very inspired along the years from South American writers like Gabriel Garcia Marquez and also like Toni Morrison that writes about trauma and also in this more fantastical way.
And
Yeah, and I thought so maybe I just got it from other cultures and other writers, but again, the more I dive into my own work and understanding of the world, I think there's also something very inside Jewish tradition and Israeli culture that is this mix. Like, I think one of the amazing things you can go through Jerusalem and you can go to a place that was like thousands of years ago and is sacred and has all this history, and then you'll go to a falafel place that just opened like a month ago, and then you'll go to a tech company, and this is all these combinations. You can see it even in the language. You have words that are very new and very old, and creates this almost like feeling of other possibilities. And there's a Israeli songwriter who I love, Ehud Banai, that once said that because the country is so small in its size compared to the US, the way of trying to open up opportunities is through time. So you go through time. So you go from Tel Aviv, it's a very young city, back to Jerusalem. And that allows all these like crazy connections to happen and ideas. And I think, and again, that's the place that are exciting for me. And I think fantasy or a bit of it, because I'm always like trying to also be very oriented towards the current point in time. And like, for me, it's not in a sense writing fantasy about far places. It's always going back to the world we live here and now. But I feel it allows us a fresh perspective about things we're dealing with in a way that literature can really open up discussion and ideas in an interesting way.
I love the idea that you're anchoring it in Israel, and Israel is timeless and is offering us, an endless opportunity to talk about different periods of time and different places. Like the travel from Tel Aviv to Yerushalayim, it might seem like it's half an hour on the train, but it's thousands of years. And that road from Yafo to Yerushalayim, but people don't understand that when they see Derech Yafo in Jerusalem, that's how they travel from Yafo, from Jaffa, the port of Jaffa, all the way to Yerushalayim and the mountains. So there's no beach. Yes, the beach was in Jaffa. And then this is exactly walking in time, in history, in historical time. I'm really honored to have you here and just hear all the process and everything you're sharing with us, because it really touches way beyond just another story. In my mind and in my brain, the processing is very different. And as you can tell, because I associated it right away with, going back over 100 years ago. Yet you see how there's no time for us, because we're here in the now, and how we want to make things better, and how the concept of the rain is really of a renewal of things that we can, start all over again as we are, tomorrow, Rosh Hashanah, another opportunity to start a new year afresh, and take whatever we can take with us and move on to a better time. Yes. So let's kind of add another one or two questions before, because, the book is definitely talks about the technology and society. And I want to talk a little bit about that area of, if you see that the startup world as inherently utopian or dystopian, or something in between, because, the clouds of the commentary, on Israeli tech, and especially when you use that on the tech industry, the critique on that, and the community of that, I wonder, how do you see it? Because, every now and then we hear about big news, about the Israeli tech, and it definitely has a great impact on the world. And so I
Yeah, definitely. So I can share a funny example of how much also I understood about the difference between cultures, Israeli and American, only when I came here in Jerusalem Beach. I have a story that is called Exit. And exit, if I'll ask you as American readers what this means, it's very simple. It's exiting the place or going out of a place. But for Israelis, and literally you'll ask every Israeli you'll know, you can like just email them now. What does exit refer to? Exit means something completely different, and that is a small startup company being sold to a big tech company. So for example, when Waze were acquired by Google, they did an exit. And in many ways, the Israeli dream these days is doing an exit. And you'll ask my friends, I have a friend who's a teacher, but if you'll ask him what's your life dream, is like doing an exit, retiring when I'm like 35 and spending the most of my life on a beach or something. And again, so there's something very much about like the fantasy, but also trying, and I think there's so much innovation and beautiful stuff in there. And I'll be very honest, coming into this book, I thought like, all right, this like very sharp criticism about tech and how it's detached from the world, and like these very rich people do not. And as I wrote about it more, and I also met people from the tech industry as part of my research, I think things are much more complicated. I think there's a lot of people who really want to change the world for the better, who really want to do really good stuff in the world. Waze, for example, was literally started by somebody that really tried to help with his friends. Like he felt that there's this amazing technology that can be used for people. And I think it's always a combination between the things. And again, we also see tech companies who are not doing things for the better of society, and it's mostly about the profit. But it's always, I think, a struggle in that sense. And I think the place where there's a struggle and it's not black or white is also much more interesting for me as a writer. Because I feel like if I just want to preach, in a sense, I would write an open ed about something. I would like write my opinion in the newspaper. But I think literature is the place where you find yourself. So, for example, like in the book, there's Naomi, the sister of Eli and daughter of Sarai. That she's like in many ways the typecast of the Israeli young tech person that just wants to do that exit and get a lot of money. But the more you dive into it, you see it's much more complex, because actually her family was in debt for many years and they owed a lot of money. And there's other things that come into play wanting to do that. And I think with the AI now, which we all hear about, and it doesn't matter if you're like literally in any field, AI is now everybody. How can I combine that? We see it also in neuroscience. And I think we think about it a lot in our field, both even in the writing field. And for me, for example, the question that I'm interested in a lot, and I also wrote a piece about it in the LA Times. I think maybe even we can share it sometime. But the idea is, I think there is this metaphor, at least in the neuroscience world, of the brain is this like this AI machine. Because we really love to take the last technology and say something about human behavior. So in the past, people were computers, and before that, people were like an engine, because that was the. And I think whenever we use a metaphor, we understand something, but we also miss out on something. And there's something about human behavior that does not fit the AI model. Because, for example, I can tell from the brain, there's so much messiness and things that are not clear and not efficient. But actually, a lot of the most innovative and interesting things came from there. Like discovering antibiotics and penicillin came from the researcher that had a messy lab and left like something on the desk, and that became eventually something that cured so many people. So I'm not against AI, and I think it's so important to find a way to have it encourage our students, our people across the world to be better and learn better. But I think we also need to understand what's so unique about humans in a way that can make it really valuable, and not come to a place that we are, in a sense, trying to be more like the technology, but the technology will actually more serve us to increase our human abilities.
Yeah, thank you. So do you see that AI affecting currently in your studies in the neuroscience?
Definitely, yeah. It's such a big, and it's really like in the past 2 years. And I'll give you an example. I was in a conference, and one of the people talking said, like, finally now we can use humans to better understand AI. Now, I think she meant the opposite, actually, but this idea of like this such an exciting period that we're more focused about the AI than the human type. And we are, for example, I think that like neuroscience is also focused in the end of the day about understanding the human brain. And I think one of the things that is happening because the technology is so exciting and so fast, we honestly are not sure what to do with it. So you would see people talking all around, also in literature. Like somebody says, I wrote the first like full story with an AI, and it's exciting, and I think it should be playful, but we also need to figure out how it becomes something that is completing us as humans and not replacing us. Because with students, for example, I think these days with these technology, you can do a pretty good job at Columbia University just by using AI. But the question is, will you have the tools going out to the world after? I'm not sure. So I think you do need to use AI because AI would be part of the world, but you need to find a way that will be useful for you and your next steps.
Absolutely. So with that, I want to bring the last topic to discuss with you is the translation, that process of translation, since I'm sure AI is also playing some part in that. But I wanted you to really tell us a little bit about that whole process, because I know also as somebody who speaks English and Hebrew, and when I need to do translation, when you view something in the original language in Hebrew and when you have to convert it to another language, it's not literally and it's not word to word, and how you convey ideas and emotion in a way that when you read something and it's an original, text, it's not always as equal. You don't get the equal, impression. So I wanted you to weigh into that a little bit.
Yeah, totally. So I think like two of my books were translated by the amazing Daniela Zamir that did an incredible job. And I think there's so much challenging in translation. There's also Israelis in general feel very close to the US because we see American TV and we're really like Taylor Swift is really big in Israel. So it's really
Which is not big, which is big everywhere.
yeah, exactly. But I think like the American culture is such a part,
Yes.
and I think like it's but then there is
Everything that comes from America, it must be good and it's excellent.
yeah.
It's without any doubt, and that's part of the problem sometimes.
Totally. And I think a lot of the times some might think that me as an Israel. I'll give you even the example, like Mitzpeh Ramon, the place I wrote about. It's so clear to me that like everybody knows it, but of course not. Like, of course, if you're not part of Israeli, so it's not in your collective conscious. So when you read my book, you imagine a place that maybe you know about, but mostly not. And then like, it's a different framework of reading it. And a lot of the work that Daniela does is making sure that those gaps won't leave you really not understanding what you're reading. And it's a really hard process. So for example, I can give you an example that somewhere in the book, I mention a very famous comic group in Israel called the Gashash Chiver. Maybe you can explain about it.
Wow. It's really historically the group that formed these three guys that are, from the Israeli, well, it's a comedian, it's singing, it's the whole evolution of humor in Israel is based on the Gashash Chiver. Even the word Gashash Chiver means very, pale, and Gashash, somebody who's kind of searching in the dark. it's
So
it's really
yeah,
the
there's
foundation of humor in Israel, and to understand them, it's yeah.
so that's like a million of levels one needs to translate it. And for example, Daniela, I don't remember, she found the equivalent in the US culture, which again is not perfect and would not be the same because it's different cultures. But that's exactly a lot of the things of, do I try to bring the Israeli culture to the US reader? Or is sometimes it's too complicated and I need you to have the sense of what it is? And I think you always lose a lot when translation, but sometimes I think also readers from other cultures gain something. And I can give you an example. Only when I met my US readers, I understand something very deep about my book. And in a sense that I thought this is in many ways a book about one's wanting to achieve themselves. And I think it's very based on me growing up in Israel, but seeing a lot of TV films and movies and stuff like that. Like, of course, that's the thing you need to do in life. But honestly, like readers told me, no, this is actually a book about the conflict between one wanting to achieve itself and wanting to be also part of family and community, which is actually so deep in Israeli tradition and culture. Because want it or not, like you're coming to a Shabbat dinner, because like you're, even if you live like in the north or south of Israel, you're like 2 hours away from your family. Most people are like in an hour away from family. You don't really have a chance if you want to go or not. And I think that's something, again, post October 7th, that I understood very deeply, that I'm both my individual person and I have my personal things I want to do in the world, but I'm also part of a group. I'm part of a society. I'm part of the Jewish culture. And for me, finding a way to combining between the two, it's so important. And if the book was not translated to English, I think I wouldn't see that in my own book. So that's things I, as an author, is really enjoying from the translation, actually.
Thank you so much, Iddo. That was really, really rich conversation. I enjoyed it very much, and I'm sure the audience too. And I think there's time now for the audience to present some questions. And I already see some questions that are in the chat. I would like to open this time for the audience to ask you questions, if they want to ask me or you, but I'll present it to you. So we have a question here, and it's about with new ways of telling stories like TV and movies and AI, where do you envision the future of literature?
So that's like a great question that I think about a lot. And I have to say, I'm not like one of the people who would say like literature is the only way to achieve good storytelling. I can see there's so much TV series that I saw and were so, or movies, emotionally
Inspiring.
deep for me and inspiring and changed me in ways that I think, and I think one of the things that took me time to understand, there's like writing books and there is the craft of storytelling. And if I think even in terms of the human brain, I think the thing we're actually really good at is not the reading part, but which is a pretty new in our like evolution as species, but actually just understanding stories. And like people would tell stories in campfires like so many years ago, and it's such a big part of our society. So I think storytelling in its sense will always have a place in different forms. And saying that, going back to what is unique about literature, and I think it also touches the question of AI, because you would say, okay, like maybe in a few years from now, AI would create a masterpiece of War and Peace in like a minute. And then what's the value of writing books and reading books in that sense? And I'm not one of the people, I do think that maybe the technology would be one day that good. Like, I think it's a possibility. But I think one of the questions one should ask themselves is, why do you read books? And if you read to get the best plot in the world, so yeah, maybe AI would definitely be there to satisfy the things you're looking for. But I have a suspicion that most people that read do not do it to get the best plot. They want to understand something deep about humanity, about the human experience, to have this amazing connection with somebody you read. When I read, for example, a book by David Grossman, the Israeli author, who's like my favorite author, I think, in many ways. I read his books and I just want to meet for him with coffee because I want to understand something deep about his experience in life. And I think in that way, books will, for at least in this future, will allow this connection that is so intimate and so deep. And I see it in a weird way more here in New York, that people come in the subways and you don't have your like cell phones and your internet. So people read books, and there's something very, very intimate about reading that I don't think we always have with different art forms. And also I can say, in my experience as a writer, books sometimes have, for example, a smaller audience than a huge Hollywood film, but they do have a longer lifespan in my feeling. So I got like a mail from Korea last month about my first book that was published there 4 years ago. And like a man in his 40s, a Korean man, said like, I feel your experiences reflect my experiences. And like, I will be honest, I did not think about a 40-year-old guy in Korea when I wrote this book, but that's the power of literature, because you're putting so much of you into it and your imagination.
I agree. I think this the impact of a book is it lasts longer. I'm not going to say movies or TV not, but I think a book, I mean, it's kind of like planted in your brain. Talking about that, David Grossman, and talking about books and how titles are provoking thoughts and interesting. If you haven't read, I'm talking to the audience here, to everyone, the book, Sus Echad Nichnas Labar, one horse entered the bar. You must read it, especially nowadays, because it's all done in a very humoristic way, in a lot of humor, to talk about a lot of tragic events and a lot of trauma. But it takes you into this. You can't put the book down. I mean, and I think it's talking about literature. And this is an example of how a book can last, in your memory for a long time. We have a couple of more questions, a very interesting question. I'll try to get to a lot of them. So here is, I'm sorry, I'm reading through. So in the US, in the last 12 months, we saw a lot of tech and in Silicon Valley get involved in and have an influence on politics. In Israel, does tech startup business successes have an effect on politics?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I think one of the good things that are in Israeli society, specifically with tech, is that, I don't know, maybe it's coincidence or nobody saw it coming, but there's not a lot of connection and rules in the government trying to take over or influence companies. I think it's a very good thing, and I really hope it continues, although it is getting harder. And I think, to be honest, I think politicians in Israel are also inspired by things that are happening here. And it is an issue, because one of the things with tech, it's never really about just tech. It's about society, and it's talking into much deeper things that are happening across it. And I think for me, at least an Israeli, I'll be honest, I think it's so important that we have this very strong tech industry that is independent from the government, because it is, I think
that helps us survive. That's our survival.
Yeah, totally. And also I say, again, tech and writing is not the same thing, at least. I wish it was, because maybe I could exit and be a millionaire for each book. But in a sense, there is this like creative process in the heart of those both processes. And I think you need a lot of freedom to do that. And that's really important for that to stay. And I think there are a lot of people in Israeli society that are making sure it will stay that way. But it is some of a struggle, because it's becoming more complex, definitely.
Great. I mean, there's a question here about the names, which I actually had also some questions for you, and maybe I'll pose after. So does your book deal with meaning of names, thinking of biblical characters, having names changes like Sarai to Sarah, which I think you answered this, Avram and Avraham, Jacob to Israel. So there's a questions about that. And I think you probably covered this, but if you want to kind of maybe tap into it, or maybe how do you see the meaning of the biblical names implemented in your current, writing, kind of bringing this
Definitely.
utopia into this world, maybe?
Yeah. So for me, again, it's there's something really amazing about reading Israeli literature. Because you can read it in both levels. Yeah. You can read just a book about something happening now and it would be great. But sometimes you have these layers, and sometimes as a writer, as you mentioned with Lilienblum, like I didn't think about it, you picked it up. And in many ways, I'm sure it was in some way in the cultural atmosphere that made me choose this word. And yeah, definitely, like for me, even Naomi, which is a character that for me symbolized like choosing to be part of something and choosing to be part. It's something that was very important. And again, with Sarai and Sarai, like for me, growing up in Israeli education, we talked a lot about Sarah. I honestly do not remember us talking about even the fact that she had a name beforehand. And for me, it was such an interesting point in time because like Sarah and Abraham are just these big figures of life that are like
Matriarch of humanity.
yeah, they're the foundation of the culture, but they're also people and they also have their own story. And I wanted to tap into that very personal way. And I think using these, I don't know, layers that we have through the Bible and the Jewish culture can allow me to do that without like referencing it. So whoever picks it up is amazing, but you can also enjoy it without it. But I really like trying to write in both levels, hoping that some would enjoy just the first and some would also have this other lever.
Great. It's another question here. And of course, we're dealing with times that, as you said, this book was written pre-October 7th. Our life changed wherever you are in the world, in Israel, outside of Israel, in any continent, your life as a Jew changed post-October 7th. And let alone as being an academic and a writer. So there's a question here: how do you feel your work is being received as an Israeli writer in the current political climate? I think in the current climate that we, and I like to kind of maybe even push away the word political, but in that climate that we're dealing.
Yeah, no, definitely it does affect like in many ways. And I'll give you the most basic example. When I come to Israel and I talk about my books, I'm a writer. When I come to the US, I'm an Israeli writer. And that is two different animals and creatures in the world. And I'll give you a funny example. Like there's a story I mentioned from Jerusalem Beach that writes about somebody that works in creating dreams. And somebody wrote me this like really long email that actually you're referring there to the establishment of Israel and the dream that broke. And like, I wish it's what I thought about. And that was, but honestly, it wasn't. But I feel when you read me as an Israeli writer and not just a writer, you have all these associations going into play. And I think it's a time in general that people are very much in their own societies and identities, and that's a very complex thing. And I think for me, at least, reading is always reading about something that opens me up to other things, even if I don't agree and get mad. And believe me, I read books that made me really mad, but I think that's part of it. And definitely, I think reading literature from this very identical place, I think sometimes can close you up to other perspectives. For me, it's very important being there, Israeli and Jewish. That's why even if I would try to hide it, my name is literally Iddo, it wouldn't work. But honestly, I really believe in it. This is the place I come from. I have my own criticism about things that are happening in Israel. I'm happy to talk about it, but I would never not show this part of this identity. This is where I come from. And honestly, I think whoever wants to have a better future in Israel, in Gaza, in Palestine, has to have these deeper conversations and open ones and not like close up and own. If I would read just people I agree with, I think that wouldn't help the world to be better. And I think part of Jewish culture has such a big part of giving people not to agree with each other. Like literally, Abraham did not agree with God about like Sodom and Gomorrah, and like tried to convince him. So I think the dialogue and the conflict is the way of creating a better future, and I insist on it as a writer.
Yeah, our blueprint is really the dialogues of disagreement, not of agreement. This is started back in the Bible, so it's a lot of disagreement and conflicts there,
Yeah.
and that's part of the tikkun olam. That's part of how we are here and how we can navigate and how can we bridge and listen to each other and find a way to really spread the light.
Yeah.
And the light that we originally you talked about beautifully in the spirituality of Kabbalah, that the vessel could not contain it, how we can find the sparks of light and hold on to it. And especially, and now we think about the time just before Rosh Hashanah, I think it's very illuminating to really use that thought as we come into conclude almost the conversation. If I can just have one more thing to say just before, but we're almost at the end. And thank you really for the beautiful questions and thoughts and sharing ideas. Our audience is great. I wanted to say that your theme in the book really bring together the themes bring together, the center and the periphery, as we talked about, and the climate and the reality and the fantasy and the family and all these things that we are really bound together. And as people that we all wanted to weave together into our tapestry and to really enrich our life, enrich the world. And I think what you're doing, Iddo, and the writing and your research is definitely adding a wonderful facet into our world today. So thank you so much for.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say, like, point out, I write about my neuroscience in like a newsletter called Neuron Stories. So you can look it up in Substack if you just want to read more. And I just want to say, like, coming back also to the last question, I think the space you create here of having that discussion about culture, about literature, I think there's a point in time after October 7 that Israeli and Jewish identity has become narrower only to one thing. And I think one of the important things is to show how wide it also can be and the opportunities of how we can imagine life. And so thank you so much for having this space and having this meaningful conversation and for just being in LA, even if only in spirit.
Virtually, yes. Even virtually is great, yes.
Yeah. Totally.
I would say that with that, I am part of the Kalaniyot, and Kalaniyot is the umbrella of our organization to support Israeli academics and among the U.S. and USC just launched a chapter. The first chapter was MIT started this, and then Harvard joined, and Columbia is part of it. So we are part of it, and actually Casden Institute is a big supporter of Kalaniyot, and I am the co-director with the director Susan Hess and the Kalaniyot at USC. So this is kind of our even first kind of event of bridging, of bringing Israeli academics, even if it's not in Israel, it doesn't matter, it's Israeli and he's an amazing writer, and how we bring together how we combine, thoughts and visions and have a discussion together in this space. So thank you everyone for joining us today. And I invite back Lisa Hansel, our director, associate director of the Casden Institute, to share a few words with you. And Shana Tova.
What a wonderful, illuminating conversation. On behalf of the USC Casden Institute and Hebrew Union College, I wish to thank our speakers, Iddo and Hagit, for such a fantastic discussion on how storytelling can improve our understanding of the human mind. To quote Iddo Gefen's recent article in July in the Los Angeles Times, titled, "The Human Brain Doesn't Learn, Think, or Recall Like AI. Embrace the Difference." If we continue thinking within this brain as AI framework, we also risk losing the vital thought processes that have led to major breakthroughs in science and art. These achievements did not come from identifying familiar patterns, but from breaking them through messiness and unexpected mistakes. Finally, to our audience, thank you all for joining us today, and I invite you to join us in person for the 2025 Jerome Niemer Lecture, which will take place on Sunday, October 26th, and will feature Dr. Magda Tater on the topic of Christian supremacy, reckoning with the roots of anti-Semitism and racism. Dr. Tater's keynote lecture will be followed by a response given by Dr. Diane Winston, Knight Center Chair in Media and Religion and Professor of Journalism and Religion at the USC Annenberg School for Communication. If you are not already on our mailing list, please join to receive information on our upcoming events. And on that note, I wish you all a wonderful day and Shana Tova. Thank you.
Shana Tova, everyone, and may this year bring us peace and security and safety to all.
Amen.